was interesting to even consider this piece because generally I don't look for European art. It doesn't really suit me. I've just never been fascinated with it. But looking at the way in which Queen Zenobia was composed, I found it quite interesting actually, and almost admirable. And I think that kind of female empowerment, especially in the Black community, is extremely important.
Let's go ahead and get started. Interpretation actually starts with observation. It builds on observation. So we're going to take some time to look really carefully and slowly at this work of art. So we're going to interpret the painting, but let's start by focusing on the subject matter. I want us today to think about a few different ways of interpreting the painting. One is looking at the subject matter and thinking about what's going on there. Another way is thinking about the artist and his choices and looking at the composition. So what might be going on in this painting?
Well, just by looking at the title, Queen Zenobia addressing her soldiers, so you can see her pointing off into a distance and they all looking up to her. So she has a higher rank than them.
All right, so you're looking at the title, which is Queen Zenobia addressing her soldiers by the artist Giovanni Battista Tiepolo. And she is up in a higher position and you see a group of soldiers here. What else do you think might be going on in this work of art?
I think I see it most as like a pre-war scene as the queen speaks to like all of her soldiers, or maybe post-war scene.
What do you see that makes you say that?
The focal point, looking at all of the figures of like the soldiers in the foreground and the background, they're all like looking towards her. And I think that helps support her like strength and triumph, I guess.
I agree with what Lily said, and I sort of see the army as one makeshift one. They don't look as prepared.
What do you see that makes you say that?
When I think of an army, they always usually have the same type of armor. And in this scene, you can see like 4 different types of shields, not the same. The armor that the soldiers have on is also very different.
That's really interesting.
It looks like a pretty maybe intense situation. Like maybe they just got out of fighting, or they're like maybe in like a more rough area.
All right, what do you see that makes it seem like an intense, rough kind of situation?
Well, some of the armor's broken in some places, and some of the helmets are just thrown around. So it looks like that maybe they're just rushing to throw their stuff down.
I personally kind of agree with Lily on the idea that it might be a post-war meeting. So this might actually be a speech to boost morale.
Fascinating. I just wanted to tell you a little bit about the story of Queen Zenobia, and then we'll keep pushing our ideas even further. Queen Zenobia is known as the warrior queen from the 4th century AD, and she had a very, very interesting life. She actually fought alongside her husband in the area that we know of today as the Middle East. And then when her husband died, she became the regent. They had a baby who was too young to become king, so she became the queen. And this was a very unusual role for a woman in antiquity. She was known for being an amazing diplomat and a war strategist. After about 5 years of conquering land, she became such a threat to the Roman Emperor Aurelian, and Aurelian decided to come against her in battle. So we think, the art historians say, that this was probably right before Aurelian conquered Zenobia. He actually put her in golden chains and took her back to Rome, where she lived the rest of her life as an admired Roman matron. Now that I've shared that with you, I'd like us to focus on the artistic choices that the artist made. So think about the composition, and now that we know the story, what else might be going on here? Lily?
I also think that the light doesn't just only hit her, but I think it also hits certain soldiers that I think are kind of depicted as strong.
I think everything about what's going on with her makes her look like the centerpiece. Because you talked about how she was praised for how well she did against the Romans, even though she was their enemy. So, it's kind of interesting for a woman in power at the time to be so focused on.
It's using the rule of thirds, and that she seems to be taking up almost an entire third of the painting, her entire body, while the soldiers take up about 2/3. So it shows that she's an important piece, but she's also very little without her soldiers, and it shows that they're loyal to her, but she also trusts in them.
She strikes me as a bit of a maternal figure in this piece.
What do you see that makes you say that?
I think it's the little boy. He's kind of sitting a little bit below her, but he's grabbing onto her cloak in such a way that I feel like a young boy would do to his mom if he was afraid. He's also redirecting his gaze, unlike the other soldiers, he won't look up at her and he's looking down, which is a bit of a contrast from everybody looking up. So I thought that was a really interesting point for the artist to make.
Okay, thank you.
I see that differently from Jessica, because I see that boy at the feet of the queen as a slave or servant figure.
Okay, what do you see that makes you think he might be a slave or servant figure?
He's pretty much the only person not looking at the queen, which to me sort of shows fear or like sense of inferiority to the queen.
Okay, so how might this work of art connect to our own time? It might be our own cultural context, it might be our own art making. How might this work of art connect to us today? So if you would take a minute and jot down your ideas, we're going to do a think, pair, share with this one. All right, when you've had a chance to jot down some initial thoughts, would you turn to one or two people nearby and just talk together?
A lot of times now they'll talk about how like women in like superhero movies, it's like they should be wearing actual armor, and that's something I thought about with Queen Zenobia, how she does have.
Yeah, that's why one of my questions was, how did she get the trust of these men? Like, because we know, like, success.
So how might this work of art connect to our own time?
I think that this painting connects to our society today, how it's becoming like more and more common to see women in power, seeing a civilization thousands of years old, being so comfortable with having a woman in leadership, and everyone actually being able to commend her for that, for her her abilities as a war strategist. I think that shows how much more advanced and socially tolerable or accepting they were. And I think that's something to look at as like a role model for us today.
I actually made an immediate connection to what I've been seeing on the news in recent weeks in regards to sexual assault. When you mentioned that the symbol that she makes with her hand could either mean a unifying or regarding silence, I kind of took that as kind of women taking a stand against things that have been going on for decades silently, finally silencing men so that their voices could be heard. And clearly we can see the repercussions.
At first when I saw this painting, I couldn't tell if she was a man or a woman. So while there is this idea of female empowerment, it's also like she has to dress like a man, look like a man, and conform to the men in the painting to have this position of authority. I think that's also relevant today because she isn't a leader because of her femininity, but she's a leader because of her ideas, and she has to kind of conform to what they see a leader to be.
Fascinating. So that raises new questions about the idea of women in leadership today and whether women must take on masculine qualities to assert their leadership.
There's part of this painting that I think kind of relates to our society today. Has to do with the barrier in between the foreground and the background. And there's this clear distinction between the queen and the soldiers close to her and kind of the people in power, and then the background and the rest of this camp, which is a much larger area than this small thing. And that kind of relates to this whole concept of like the 1% and how the small, wealthy group of people in our country or in our society kind of almost control the majority of the population.
Very interesting, thinking about those who are in power, the influencers, and this separation that's symbolic here with the fence. Thank you so much for all of your thoughtful interpretations. And I think really what we've done today is we have looked carefully at this painting, we've developed interpretations together, we've explained our thinking, we've backed it up with evidence, with our observations of what we see, and then we've connected it to today, and we've pulled out some big themes that are relevant to us today.